So I just want to welcome everyone to the session. My name is Grace Johnson, and I represent the Office of Alumni and Family Engagement. We are so grateful to have Marcus Rodriguez, who has agreed to lead this session, planning for college in the midst of uncertainty. We know this is an issue that is very close to many, dear and near to our hearts and to our families. Answers we're looking for, it will provide us with some tools that can kind of help us get through this together as we're making decisions. And we hope this will be helpful to all of you. I want to encourage everyone to use the Q&A or the chat box for any questions you may have, as well. If you're comfortable to try to build a community among us through this time of being separated. So if you're comfortable with that, please feel free to do that as well. So now I just want to introduce Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, who has been a professor of psychology here since 2018, and he's just been so amazing in providing his expertise over these past few months that we've been all struggling with so much stress and anxiety in our lives, with so much going on in the world we live in. So without further ado, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez.
Awesome, thank you. So right before we got started, I was actually getting to know some of the people here. So I'm wondering.
Go ahead, Marcus.
Am I on?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay, perfect. And I was wondering, because a few other people have turned on your cameras, which, I mean, this is why people don't turn on their cameras, because I'm going to pick on you. But I wonder, Jennifer or Amanda, like, is there anything specific as you think about the idea of like skills for regulating emotions? I know that, for example, Alex was saying that she's got a group of juniors and sophomores who are getting ready to apply to colleges, and so how these skills could be helpful. Suzanne initially said she wanted more stress and anxiety, later changed her mind and said she decided she wanted less. But I wonder if there's anything, as I think about trying to make this as tailored as possible to what would be helpful. I don't know, anything come up for either of you?
I think just dealing with maybe not knowing, and I guess trying to be okay with it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is, yeah. Are you a current student, an alum, a parent? What's?
I'm in the Office of Advancement.
Okay.
But I mean, this is something
very
I know
relevant.
People are, you know,
yeah,
worried about.
Awesome. Yeah. Jennifer?
Yep, and I'm a alum with a son who's a rising senior, and had gotten to Claremont once. I'm in Washington, D.C., Maryland area, and made it to 2 schools in his junior and sophomore years, and then had no opportunity to do the spring visits that we were trying to do to look at colleges. And so he's sort of pushed everything off and said, I don't know, the books don't help, the websites don't help. And it just, I think, has kind of shut him down. And so I'm curious about kind of how, as a parent, do I help him navigate what I think is kind of like a sense of, you know, I can't get the information I want. I don't know how to proceed. It's not what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, no, I get that. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing. I will definitely, I think what I'm going to share today will feel very relevant to that for sure. Others have turned on their cameras. You shouldn't have done that, but now I want to know, like, David, Sheila, Kathy, I'm wondering, is there anything as you think about like these skills that I'm planning to talk about generally, like how to reduce emotions that we want to reduce and increase emotions we want to increase? Is there anything, I don't know, that feels relevant for each of you as you think about this time?
Hi, Marcus.
Hi.
I'm with David and Mary, and we have
Hi.
a rising freshman. So our situation is he's never even been to camp, you know, to school yet. And so dealing with that anxiety and uncertainty, but also that need for his first taste of real independence. Mm-hmm. He's so ready to move out of the house and move to his next chapter, and yet here we are. So any words of wisdom around helping the students with that would be great.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Hi, Marcus.
Hi.
I am a parent of a rising sophomore, and we live in Massachusetts. And it was a rough go this spring. I think going across the country was really difficult, and then combining that with having to come home early and COVID, I think there was some underlying anxiety while he was away that he didn't really share with us, and then it really came full force when they came back, and it was kind of a disaster, to be honest. It's been rough, and I'm worried now going back what that will bring for him.
Yeah, this has been a really challenging time for a lot of, I mean, for myself personally, as I've if you've been in these workshops I've been sharing, but also like as a therapist, I know a lot of my clients who have other underlying challenges. It just raises the volume on that. If there was already something that was like, I'm you know, if they're already having a hard time interpersonally or with their self-care or with wellness or stress management, this just really made it especially challenging for a lot of the people in our lives that we care about. So yes, I want to talk to that. And I think to the element of where like when I think about and I hear about your child, I think that there's stress and anxiety, and I think there's sadness there. And so like how to manage the sense of loss and the sense of grief of like, this is not how I wanted my semester to go, right? This is not how it should have gone. You know, those challenges I think can make it really tricky. So thank you for sharing. Kathy?
Yeah. So I'm the parent of a rising senior at Pitzer who's trying to sort out, you know, what they're going to be doing in the fall. But I also have a rising college freshman who's going to another school, but has decided to take a gap year because of COVID, wasn't otherwise planning to, and just now we're getting to the point where some of her friends are starting to go to school, and there's just so much like she doesn't know what the right choice was. She's not exactly sure how she's going to structure her year. And so I think she's going to be worked up and upset as like just kids are going off to college and she's not, but she also didn't want to go under those, you know, these conditions. So it would be helpful for me to know just some ways I can respond to her, or maybe helpful strategies of things to say, because I usually always seem to say the wrong thing.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So a lot of the therapy I do is I work with adolescents primarily and young adults in my therapy, right? The clinical practice that I work with. And I am often the parent coach, so that the kid has an individual therapist. I do the parent coaching. And this is often the thing, is the parent is like, hey, do you want to go to the gym? And the kid's like, what the hell? Like, why would you even say that? And you're like, wait, what? Like, I don't know what I said wrong. Like, or the parent will be like, hey, like, you know, do you want me to call some of your friends and you guys could set up like a play date? You're like, what the hell? Like, oh, are you really asking me that? And you're like, I thought so. I don't know. Like, I'm sorry. I'll call back next Tuesday. Right? And so I think that I would love to speak to that a little bit because I think that so much of what we're dealing with is the stress of these circumstances. And then a part of it is also like, how do I manage as a parent trying to be supportive, as a teacher trying to be supportive, as an administrator, like what is that going to look like? So yeah, this is helpful because it's giving me an idea. Actually, it's kind of shifting what I was planning on doing. I think I need to like zoom out based on what I was planning on talking about today to show a little bit of the big picture. So then when I zoom in and talk to you about the specific skill that I want to discuss today, which is called opposite action, that it will make more sense why we use the skill opposite action and when we use it. And then there's Jose, my student. Hey, Jose. Oh shoot, I think you're frozen. Bummer. I think you just got so excited, just like froze, like with anticipation. All right, well, let me then jump in and get started. And I encourage interruptions or like hand raising or whatever feels helpful. But I think I want to zoom out a little bit to talk about, so if I'm going to introduce skills today about how do we regulate our emotions, right? How in general, if there's an emotion that shows up and we want less of that, meaning like we want that emotion to be less intense, or we want that emotion to show up less often, or when it does show up, we want to be able to like bring it back down to baseline a little bit sooner so that it doesn't take so long, especially because if it takes a really long time to come back down to normal, like if something happens and it shoots your emotion, like your distress up to like a 7 or an 8 out of 10, and then you slowly over the course of like 30 minutes, an hour, you're still like at a 6.5. It just takes a long time. And then something happens again. Someone else comes in and says like, hey, are you going to the gym? Because I'm going. And then like, boom, that just like shoots them up again. Whereas if their distress had been down like at a 1 and they heard that, it probably wouldn't have had the same effect. And so then it creates this effect where a lot of our kids might be really struggling, kind of like bouncing at these like higher levels of emotional dysregulation, and also ourselves, right? That happens to all the best of us at different times. So what is it then that I want to give a skill for how to regulate that? I think putting it first in the context of how I help parents, right? My goal is to help people to identify what they're feeling so that they can understand what their emotion is trying to tell them, right? Like, I don't believe, like, emotions are not always a problem. A lot of times they're giving us really valuable information. It's like, when I feel scared, that's great. Like that emotion evolved through millions of years of evolution. So that when I hear rustling in the bushes, I think, oh, the last time I heard that sound over by this cave, my cousin got eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. I better run, right? So that fear actually is giving me good information. It's saying, get out of there, run, right? Or if I'm experiencing, I don't know, like, for each of our emotions, they serve a really valuable function. And we got to figure out, what is it telling me? And when we try to figure out what it's telling me, sometimes that's unclear because the emotion doesn't always fit the facts, right? It's not always like in line with what's going on. And then the third step is, once we can figure out and validate that emotion and be like, oh, it makes sense, I hear what it's saying, then we can decide, how do I want to manage it? Which means sometimes we manage the emotion by acting on it. We decide, like, I feel scared, I'm going to manage my fear by running away from that big shadow that's hiding in those bushes, right? Or that's growling at me. And sometimes, though, we need to actually modulate our behavior to not act on the emotion, because the emotion, it's either not fitting the facts or it's not really effective. So I guess zooming out to talk about, like, how to identify emotions, I think that topic might be a little bit beyond the scope of what we can discuss today, but essentially we need to, like, be aware of what we're thinking, be aware of, like, changes that happen in our body, be aware of, like, what are the events that happened right before this emotion that I'm noticing, and be aware of what are my urges, like, in this moment, what do I want to do? So those are like 4 different clues for identifying my emotion. But I want to talk about the function of emotion, because I think there's a lot of places where you can go and learn about how to identify emotions. I think there's less resources available for, like, how do we then identify the function? What is the information of this emotion trying to tell me? So for example, I'll just choose some key emotions that I think many of us are feeling, and a lot of our students might also be feeling during this time. So I'm thinking about, like, fear and anxiety, right? It's trying to tell us that there's danger, that there's something risky and you need to avoid it. You need to get away from it. And so in that situation, it's effective, like, run away. Anger is telling us that someone is blocking a goal of ours or taking away something really important of ours. So it's telling us, like, protect, defend, attack, right? And it's effective if, I don't know, if someone runs up and, like, grabs my daughter off of a bicycle and starts running away, like, that's a moment to get angry, not be, like, curious, like, hi, I wonder, like, who are you, right? Like, that's not the moment. Like, anger will serve me. I'll puff up my chest. I'll talk yelling really loud. I'll get blood pumping. And if I have to get physically aggressive, I will, and it's effective, right? If I feel sadness, the function of sadness, I think, is a lot harder for a lot of us. Let's not even talk about students. First, let's apply it to our own lives. Sadness is a lot harder to figure out what is the function. And the function is generally that it helps us figure out that some of our needs aren't being met, right? That we have some needs that aren't being met. And sadness lets us know that either there's a need not being met, or the way that you're trying to go about getting that need met is hopeless, and you need to stop wasting, like, energy. So if you think about it from, like, a caveman perspective, it's, maybe I'm out in front of my front yard, like trying to build a dam. Like maybe there's like a stream that goes in front of the cave where I live. And so I'm trying to build a dam so that like the water goes by, but the fish stay there and I can fish them out and I can like have more food for me and my family. But I try to build the dam and it gets brushed away by the stream. So I try again, it gets washed away by the stream. I try a third time, it gets washed away again. Then I'm like, this sucks. And so I get really discouraged. I go to my cave and I lay down, right? Like when we're sad, we basically feel like what we end up doing is we want to like lay down and do nothing. We want to isolate. We want to cry. We want to listen to sad music. And we want to basically like be in a dark and quiet place by ourselves. That is actually very functional when you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, because in that case, I'm not going to keep wasting calories trying to build a dam when clearly something about the way I'm doing it isn't working. So it's letting me know, like, stop doing that. That's hopeless. And we don't have refrigerators in caveman times. We don't have Costco. So if I waste 2 or 3 days of my energy trying to do something and I'm not gathering food, then that puts me at really high risk of starvation. So sadness, the function was, it says, slow down, go back to your cave and think. Like picture yourself building the dam, because that burns way fewer calories than actually like moving your hands and legs and doing it. And that's what happens, right? When we get really sad, we sort of like isolate. Some of your kids, if you're like watching them during the pandemic, I'm guessing they're probably spending a lot more time in their room. They're spending a lot of time on their screens. They're like spending a lot of time on Netflix. And so they're sad. The problem is they're not getting in touch with that sadness. They're acting on their sadness without like understanding what it's trying to tell them. But essentially, like, it makes sense from that perspective. One, because I save calories, I slow down, and maybe I can picture a better way to do it. But the other is, when I get quiet, I start thinking, maybe one of my neighbors is like, I don't know, maybe Sheila's like, hey, Marcus, I noticed that you haven't come out of your cave like all day. Is everything okay? Right? Maybe you heard me like whimpering in there, right? And then I'd be like, no, not really. Like, I'm trying to build this dam and it keeps getting brushed away and I'm feeling really discouraged. So then what are you likely to do if you hear me say that?
Get up.
Yeah. And what else? So if you hear me say like, I'm feeling super discouraged, I'm having a hard time building this dam, and you see me like crying.
Try to help you, maybe help you build the dam.
Yeah, right. You might be like, oh, well, maybe I can help you. Like, let me finish gathering these nuts and berries, you know, and then I'll help you with that. Right. So like sadness serves a function of getting people to like come closer and to help. It also serves the function of saving calories. I think this is super important because it's not intuitive. And a lot of people feel like if I'm sad, that's a bad emotion. I got to push it away. I got to stop having that. When in reality, like, if we always immediately, instinctively push it away, suppress it, avoid it, we're going to be missing out on like, hey, something that you're doing to try to get your needs met isn't working. I need you to try something else. And it also draws in other people's help. But alternatively, if I try to build a dam, it brushes away, and then I get really mad and I'm like, oh, and I start like throwing sticks in my cave and kicking the cave wall, and then Sheila walks by and sees me like throwing a fit. Probably she's gonna be like, whoa, like look away, like just like go to my cave, like leave him alone, because what if he throws something and it hits me and it, I don't know, like hurts me, and there's no like, I don't know, urgent care nearby. So that could become a life-threatening problem. So they avoid, actually. So like sadness can help us to actually get the help we want, whereas anger pushes people away, creates more conflict, which ironically is like not what people want. The problem is that a lot of times what we end up doing, or one more example of like an emotion and its function, is like shame. So shame is a really common emotion that shows up. As a professor, I see it show up a lot in my students, and I know that a lot of them feel embarrassed, which is like a synonym for shame. I know they feel embarrassed, and I still challenge them to do things that they feel are really uncomfortable. And a part of that is what ends up happening with shame. The function of shame is prevents us from doing behaviors that are going to get us kicked out of the group, which from an evolutionary perspective, that is a matter of life and death, right? If I'm living in a cave with all of you, and then it's raining outside and it's cold one day, and I like ate some like bad mushrooms I shouldn't have eaten, and I've got diarrhea, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to go outside and poop. I'm just going to like go to a corner of the cave and poop in the cave here. then people are going to be like, dude, Marcus, like, this is now the second time this has happened. We've told you not poop in the cave, and then you're going to kick me out. Right. And now I'm like expelled from the group, which in like back in those times, like that's the death sentence. Like I can't survive on my own. And so shame is the emotion that says like, even though it's wet and cold outside, I'm going to go out there and poop and then come back and sleep in the cave with my family and my community. It is very helpful and functional. It prevents us from doing stuff that's going to get us rejected, right? And a lot of times we have unjustified shame or guilt, right? Guilt is the emotion that helps us make repairs if we've done something that like goes against our values or goes against like who we want to be, so that we can apologize or repair. So the one key point is the goal isn't just to not feel the emotions. The goal is to respond to the emotions effectively. If I'm engaging in a behavior that's going to get me kicked out of the group, and it's important for me to stay in this group, then actually listening to the shame is important. I'm going to not do that thing. Or if I'm feeling really sad and I figure out like, oh, it's because my needs aren't getting met. Great. That's actually telling me I need to figure out a different way to get my needs met, right? Or to get that thing back that I've lost. Like sadness is the emotion that like, if my puppy runs away, that's the motivation to go and like put up a bunch of signs that say like, hey, like lost puppy reward, like, you know, call my phone if you find it. If I don't feel sad, I'm like, oh, it's, or whatever, like I'll just buy another one, you know? And so sadness communicates this to us and we decide, okay, what am I going to do with that emotion versus just like instinctively and immediately suppressing it. So why is this? And then of course, what I'm about to share this skill is the idea of how do we then manage it? But why is this important? So I want to take the examples that several of you have given about like your children and the stressors that they're going through, and then the stressors that you have in your own life and how those can interact. The key is understanding that anger is almost always a secondary emotion, right? So like I would just encourage you to memorize that sentence. And that means that anger is almost always an emotion that comes to the rescue, and it rescues you from sadness. It rescues you from the feeling of shame, the feeling of fear, the feeling of guilt, right? It comes in and it's very immediate. It's not like a choice we make. It's just in that moment, I feel scared. I don't want to feel scared because that feeling is awful. I'd rather feel angry because anger is a little bit empowering. Anger feels like it feels bad and it kind of also feels a little bit good. Whereas like sadness just feels bad. It just feels really hard to sit with. Or like fear, it's like if you've ever, I don't know, we all have, like if you feel really, really terrified, there's no part of that feels like, ooh, that kind of feels nice. Or like shame. And so what can happen is like, I think an example I've already given in a previous one of these workshops is like, if my daughter runs into the street and I see her and what you'll see like Marcus getting angry, right? I'll be like, Journey, you can't do that. Like, no, don't run into the street. I've told you so many times. When in reality, the emotion I'm feeling is fear. I'm feeling really scared because maybe like I had a picture in my mind of like something really bad happening to her. I don't want that. That feels unbearable. That just feels unpleasant. I'd rather feel anger. And over time we've learned, okay, I'd rather feel that emotion, or I'd rather totally distract altogether. The goal in learning to manage our emotions and learning to support the people around us to do that is we have to first identify, what emotion am I feeling? So I come in and I'm like, hey, like, you know, do you want to start like looking at schools for the fall? And your kid's like, no, I don't. Like, it's pointless. Like, you know, you're not going to be able to find anything good online. And then you kind of might, maybe if your kid says that and they're raising their voice and they're not even looking at you, then all of a sudden you get frustrated. And then all of a sudden you're like, you know what, like with that attitude, like, you know, you're right. Like nothing is going to, you know, work out well. And then pretty soon you're arguing and neither of you are addressing your primary emotion. Now both of you are acting on and expressing your secondary emotion of frustration and anger. And it's going back and forth and escalating. And at the end of that argument, maybe a lot of times we never even come back to the primary emotion, right? Maybe as a parent, our primary emotion is worry. I'm really worried if my kid isn't proactive about these things, that they're going to end up being in a really passive place where they can't really make a lot of choices anymore, or they don't have the information they need to make the choices that I think are going to help them get what they most want, right? So I'm feeling worry. My kid, though, is feeling sad. but they're expressing anger. So it's really hard. And they're attacking me of like, you know what, like, can you just stop nagging me about school stuff? Like I told you, I'm looking into it. And you're like, and then you respond to the accusation of nagging. And it's trying to figure out like, this is why it's tough. But when we learn the skills of emotion regulation, we can stop and notice like, my kid is now upset with me. My kid is expressing anger. What emotion am I feeling first off? I'm also feeling anger, but what was happening right before that? I'm feeling worry. Why does that make sense? Does that make sense? Yeah, it makes sense. What is worry trying to tell me? Worry is trying to tell me like, I really want like to encourage and to motivate my kid to like, to have, you know, as much information as possible to be able to make the decisions that I think are going to help them to be as happy as possible. And so once I figure that out, I'm like, okay, given that that's my worry, then I'm primarily worried. I'm not actually going to respond to my kid's anger right now because that's not actually going to bring me closer to resolving my worry. The solution for my worry is either I need to use other skills on my own to decrease my own worry and my own anxiety and to radically accept that ultimately like my kid's decisions are in many ways out of my control, in the same way that like what happens with the pandemic or when schools do or don't open is out of my individual control. And in other ways, like try to, because my worry is that they're not going to be, you know, collecting the best information or making the healthiest choices, then I need to stay focused on that to help them approach choices that I think are going to be healthy for them. So to keep focused on my worry emotion and not get distracted by my anger. My worry says, stay focused, stay single-mindedly focused on helping my kid make the best choices. But then, and this is the really hard work, is I need to perceive what is my kid feeling besides the anger and the frustration that they're expressing. And I think for a lot of our kids, they're sad, right? And I think it's really hard for us when our kid is saying like, stop nagging me about school, mom, you know, or the kid is saying like, you know, like, I don't know, like, who cares whether or not I get up and go outside today? Like, I'm fine, like, leave me alone. For us to recognize, all right, that's what I'm getting is this surface level expression. What actually, I think my kid is feeling really sad and really disappointed that this is how their semester turned out, that this is how their transition to college is going to turn out, that this is how their time at college is going to likely, how it's wrapping up. You know, maybe that this is how my kid is feeling anxious. And when I bring up the topic of college, it's sort of like putting this scary thing in front of them and saying like, hey, look at this. And they're like, I'm actually doing everything I can to not look at that. And now that you've brought it up, I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling nervous. And so I don't want to think about that. I don't want to feel that. So trying to figure out and guess what your kid might be feeling to then actually help them stay with that first emotion of like, they just said like, leave me alone. You're like, why are you nagging me? And what that would look like, again, this is like in the future after you've been using these skills for a while, would be something like, you know what, like, I'm sorry. Like I actually was coming in here to like, I guess I was coming in here to try to appease my own worry. I was noticing myself worrying about you. And I'm noticing that probably you're feeling some of that same worry because there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things that are out of your control. And I also imagine that you probably feel pretty sad because this is pretty disappointing. It's not the way that you intended your semester to go. And I'm sorry, because that's not how I wanted it to go for you either. So they just expressed anger. You validate the primary emotion of fear or sadness. I don't know what your kid will say next, but I know that it won't continue to escalate in anger, right? They might be like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not sad. You're like, I don't know. Or they might be like, I'm not like worried. Like, I just don't want to think about it now, right? And maybe that's them. They're not ready in that moment to face that, like, there is a certain element of sadness and anxiety that they're feeling about that. But little by little, we help them to say, like, maybe there's this emotion here. And if you do have that emotion, I just want you to know, I think it makes sense because of these reasons. And then just like dropping the rope, right? And saying, I was actually coming here because I was noting myself feeling worried. I was doing work, or I just got off a call at work and I thought about you and I was like, oh shoot, like, what is my kid doing? And like, are they okay? You know, are they okay now? And are they making decisions now that are going to lead them to feel okay later? So I actually came in here partly to like appease my own worry. And I want to say, like, I just want to own that too. It can help to reduce those interactions that we have and we find ourselves having with our kid. But it's really, really hard to do that if we haven't first recognized, what emotion am I feeling? What is that emotion trying to tell me? And how do I want to respond to that? Do I want to act on my emotion? Do I want to regulate the emotion and reduce it? Do I want to push it away and say, no, not now. So that then I can decide, once I've regulated my emotions and said that what I feel makes sense, it's a little bit easier for me to then access my own wise mind to be able to like identify what my kid might be feeling other than the anger they're expressing, so that I can try to like point out why it makes sense that they're feeling that. And then we can actually address the real issue, is that my kid feels a lot of grief at the loss of an experience they expected to have, at worry about not having security about what their future is going to look like in the immediate and sometimes even more distant future. And if we could actually sit with that, I think we'd feel more connected. We would say things that cause less disruption in our relationships with our loved ones, and little by little help each other become more and more willing to, when effective and when it's useful, to lean into emotions and feel them without necessarily having to distract with anger or having to distract with some sort of like, I don't know, with like expressing some other emotion or distracting. So that was a lot of information. Anyone have any questions about that before I talk about opposite action?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I thought it was really profound how you said that anger actually can be seen, it rescues us from sadness, shame, fear, guilt. So in that moment with your child, when they are angry, is it best, even if you want to kind of lean into the emotions, is it best just to give them a little time and then come back and try to lean into those emotions? Or should you just stay in the moment and, like you said, apologize and talk about how you're feeling and see if that allows for conversation to begin about true emotion?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if there's like I know there's not like a one size fits all. I'll speak to like, since I gave a very specific example, I could give different scenarios of how I could play that out. Is maybe like my kid runs into the street and I run out there in like a frantic, like panicked hurry and grab her. And then in that moment, again, because these things happen so fast, but in that moment to recognize like, how hard am I squeezing her arms? You know, like as I'm pulling, like you can pull your kid away and then you can like pull your kid away, you know, like, and so like to ask myself like, and then to bring her to the side and to like first take a breath and be like, Journey, I feel really, really scared when you do that. And I know that I just now yelled at you and I'm sorry because I probably looked really angry. I actually want you to know I just feel super, super scared because in my mind, I pictured something really bad happening to you. And I noticed myself, I noticed my heart beating fast, and I noticed, you know, this worry that I wouldn't have you with me or that something bad would happen to you. In that case, I'm doing two things. I think that both of those, whether I get angry at her and yell at her, or I tell her that daddy feels super scared, I think I'm going to achieve my goal of trying to help her not go into the street, right? So that goal is met. But by expressing my fear rather than my anger, I think I'm able to teach one more thing to my daughter is, oh, by the way, we can feel emotions. It's okay to feel and express fear. It's okay to feel and express sadness. It's okay to feel and express shame. Because the more that you can feel it and allow yourself to feel it and be curious about what it's trying to tell you, yeah, I mean, our emotions are valuable resources. So I think it really depends on the scenario, but I would say a lot of times it is leaning into expressing our primary emotion and saying, oh, you know what? I actually came in here because I noticed I came in here to ask you about your school plans for the fall. Partly I'm realizing, you know, now that you're like expressing anger at me, I'm realizing actually that I think I came in here because I was worried about you. And I was actually feeling sad because I didn't want your semester to be this way. And I didn't want to feel that sadness and that worry. And I'd rather talk to you about specific details of your day than for me to sit there and realize like, I'm really disappointed. I really wish this hadn't been how my kid's senior year, you know, wrapped up. That in doing that, we teach our kid it's okay to feel and express emotions other than, you know, the few, and each family is different about what emotions are like more allowed, more acceptable. But what we teach is like all the emotions can teach us valuable information, and we don't want to ignore any of them. We don't want to be completely controlled by any of them, but we also don't want to be people who shut ourselves off from what they're trying to tell us. I don't know if that was an answer to your question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions before I go into opposite action? So opposite action is one of the skills that we can use if we find ourselves continually engaging, like feeling an emotion that is either not justified or not effective. So not justified is really tough. And I'm generally going to actually ignore that unless it's like really, really obvious. Like if I'm feeling super, super scared, but someone brought like a tiny little bunny, right? In that case, I would say like my fear is not justified. The little bunny is not going to eat me. But if I feel that panic, I would say it's not justified. Most of the time, I actually think our emotions are justified. Like more than 90% of the time, our emotions are justified. But the intensity of the emotion, the duration of the emotion isn't always effective, right? That doesn't always fit the facts. So when I say justified, I guess I'm more talking about the intensity of the emotion. Is it justified in this scenario? Is it effective? So the first thing that we want to ask ourselves when we notice ourselves feeling an emotion is, once we've identified the emotion, right? I'm feeling sad right now. I'm feeling embarrassed about something that I said or did that I really wish I hadn't done or said, because I think that it hurt that person, and I think that it can, that I think that it can affect how people perceive me, and there can be consequences for that. Or just because like it's actually against my own personal values of who I want to be. So noticing what the emotion is, and then asking myself, like, is that justified? If the answer is yes, then I need to say, of course I feel this emotion. That makes sense. If not, then I need to ask myself, how can I reduce the frequency, the intensity, the duration of this emotion moving forward? And opposite action is the answer to that question. It's not the only answer, but I think it is the easiest answer to explain of how do we regulate our emotions. So the way it works is like this. Each emotion has an urge associated with it, right? And again, I clump emotions together. So like if I say sadness, I mean disappointment, I mean, I don't know, I mean gloominess, I mean, like what are some other synonyms for sadness? Like, I mean, like all of a sudden like sad words have left me, like feeling crushed, disconnected, feeling dejected, feeling lonely. I put lonely as a synonym for sadness. Feeling alone, melancholy, feeling neglected, feeling, I don't know, grief. So those would be, sadness emotions, words. Or like maybe if I'm feeling like anxiety, right? Anxiety, like some synonyms could be like fear or apprehension or dread or, jumpiness, nervousness, feeling overwhelmed, feeling stressed. Those are like other synonyms for anxiety. Or if I'm feeling, I don't know, angry, maybe like synonyms could be like grouchy or annoyed or aggravated, irritated, right? So each of these, so I think about emotions as trying to like clump them into general categories. But each emotion, when you clump them into general categories, it has an urge associated with it, meaning something that you want to do when you feel that emotion. So when we feel sadness, what do we want to do? I already mentioned, we want to isolate, we want to be by ourselves, we want to do nothing, right? Mm-hmm. When we feel scared, what do we want to do? What's our urge in that moment?
Get away from the situation.
Yeah, exactly. We want to get away. So if I'm scared of snakes, then like, and you tell me that there's like a snake in that room, then I want to get out of the room, right? Or like, it's that easy. I want to like avoid it. Or if I have social anxiety and you tell me like, come to a party, it's like, nope, like I'm not going to that party. I want to get away from the thing that makes me feel anxious. What about like shame? What is our urge? When we feel the emotion of shame or embarrassment, what things do we want to do?
Hide.
Yeah, we want to hide. We want to like take up as little space as we can in the room, right? Mm-hmm. We want to like cover our faces. Mm-hmm. What about when we feel angry? What is our urge? What do we want to do? Yell, right? Attack. We want to like punch and break stuff. Yeah, we want to like attack and break stuff. What about if we're feeling, what about when we feel like love? What's our urge?
We want to hug.
Yeah, we want to like hug and kiss and like hold tight and be closer and spend more time with that thing, right? So if you have a new puppy and you love it, you just want to take it everywhere. You're like, can I take it to work? Can I put it in my desk? You just want to be with it a lot. If you feel happy, what is your urge? What do you want to do?
Be with people. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you want to be with people. You want to share your happiness with others, right? You want to talk about the thing. You want to do it again and again. So like, if, I don't know, like the first time I took my kid to like Disneyland, like she just wanted to talk about it again and again. She just wanted to look at the pictures again and again, and she wanted to go back, right? So like that, because that, she felt happy. And so you just want to like, let's write it again. You're like, that line was like an hour and a half. Like, no, we're not going to do that again, right? But like, that's so happy you have that urge. So now when we think about if the emotion is not justified. So again, like I'm trying to, and I'm not doing it very clearly, I'm walking you through some steps. Step 1 is identify the emotion. Step 2 is determine if that emotion is justified, right? If it's effective to act on that emotional urge. If the answer, well, which I guess when you identify the emotion, you're also identifying the urge associated with it. If the answer is no, it's not justified, in my wise mind, it's not effective to act on this emotion, then the next thing that we do is we decide, then what is the opposite action of my current urge? Because remember, we talked about it 2 weeks ago. We said emotions love themselves. If we feel an emotion and we act on that emotional urge, we're going to have more of that emotion, right? So if we like express anger, we think that like, I just want to get it out. Research shows when you express a lot of anger, you just feel more angry in the long run. Like you end up having more of that emotion. So what do we do then to, in that moment, act opposite? It's identify. So what is the opposite? So if our urge when we feel sad is to isolate, to be alone, to do nothing, what is the opposite of that urge?
Go outside with people and share and.
Yeah, like get up, get active, and be with people. Yeah, like get outside. So what is the opposite of fear? So if our urge when we feel scared is to avoid something, to get away from it, what's the opposite of that?
Lean into it.
Yeah, to stay there, right? To like approach the thing that we feel scared of. What about if we feel angry, right? In our urge, what is the opposite? So our urge is to attack, to yell, to break stuff. What is the opposite of that?
Calm.
Yeah, like to gently avoid, right? To gently like walk around, or even to be like kind towards, right? Like when I feel angry, I just want to like punch something or someone. And this could be like, oh, like let me think about, like maybe even be gentle. What about when I feel ashamed? My urge is to like hide, right? My urge is to take up little space to cover my face. What's the opposite action of that?
Be bold.
Yeah, so like sitting up straight, open body posture, speaking like clearly and loudly, making eye contact, right? Doing the thing again. So like maybe like, I don't know, if you feel ashamed of telling people that you like, I don't know, the Backstreet Boys, and you feel embarrassed, but you're like, you know what, that shame's not justified. Like I do, I just love them. Then just saying it again and again, right? Or like, yeah, like an example for me is like, I didn't finish high school. Yeah, I know. And I feel ashamed of that. And I realized like for a long time that was like getting in my way. And the more I didn't talk about it, the more shame I felt. And I was like, you know what, I need to act opposite to my shame. So I just tell people like, oh, I didn't act, like I got to my senior year and I basically took my mom said like, yeah, you don't have to go to school. I was like, sweet. Like, I didn't know that was an option. I wish you had told me when I was in 8th grade. Right. And so I didn't finish my senior year. So I think, but sharing that little by little, now I can share it and I don't feel as much shame. That's how opposite action works, is you notice your emotion, you ask yourself, is this emotion justified? Is it effective? If no, that means I want to feel it less. Then what is the opposite action of my urge? And then do that thing, and then do it all the way. So this is where it gets even trickier. So the next step is like, you identify opposite action. The next step is do opposite action all the way and do it again and again. That's where it gets really tricky. So if we said that the opposite for fear is to approach the thing, for example, it's possible that I could do opposite action. I could say like, I'm afraid to go to a party, right? I'm afraid to, I don't know, to go near that dog because of some scary experience I've had, or I'm afraid to think about my next semester at college. I'm worried. I feel nervous when I try to imagine, what it's going to be like if I can't, eat in the cafeteria with my friends, or if I feel worried about thinking about like, what if I get sick? And every time that happens, my urge is to not think about that, is to totally like avoid that thought, to isolate, and to like get myself basically like to push that thought away and do whatever it takes to not feel and think those things. Opposite action would actually be, if I want to have not such a big reaction when I think about, for example, like Alexis's students who are applying to college, like if I don't want to have a huge reaction every time I think about personal statements and SAT scores and letters of recommendation and visits to college, then maybe what would be effective for me would actually be to lean into that emotion. So that little by little, I sort of inoculate myself, kind of like Princess Bride, right? Where he like drinks a little bit of poison every day until eventually he like kills the bad guy in like a poison drinking contest, right? It's this idea of like, I take a little bit of sadness, a little bit of sadness, a little bit of sadness, so that the effect that it has on me eventually isn't as big. And I can have sadness show up and sadness go, and I can keep doing what I need to do without needing to like engage in some behavior so that I don't have to feel that. That's the power of opposite action. So for example, if I'm feeling really scared and I want to engage in opposite action, I think we all intuitively have done this, right? This is not like, no one's like, oh my God, I've never thought about this in my life, right? The answer is like, go to the party. I think the part that's unintuitive is the part of doing it all the way. So a lot of times people say, oh, I'm acting opposite to my emotion urges, right? Like I went to the party and I still feel super anxious. It's probably because we didn't do it all the way. So what would it look like to act opposite to your fear, but only go part way? Is I would show up at the party, right? But then I would be like on my phone the whole time, right? Or I would go and take like smoke breaks every like 10 minutes. Or maybe I would like get really drunk before the party, or I would get high before the party so that I feel like, well, like, who even cares? Like, it's fine. And that helps me regulate my emotions. Or maybe I go to the party, but I only hang out with like my one friend. So like Grace and I are like always together. So like if she goes to the kitchen, I go to the kitchen. If she goes to the bathroom, I just like stand outside and act like I'm waiting to use the bathroom, right? Or maybe I like hang out with like at the food table, or I play with the host's dog the whole time. Those are ways where I'm acting opposite to my anxiety, because my emotion urge was when Grace said like, let's go to the party. My anxiety said, tell her that your stomach doesn't feel good. Like tell her you have a really big presentation to make tomorrow and you can't do it. Cancel, don't go. That's my emotion urge. I didn't act on it. I acted opposite by going. But then I didn't act all the way. And so I showed up at the party and did all those behaviors. So then what would opposite action all the way look like in this party scenario? Opposite action to like our anxiety.
Engaging with other people, introducing yourself.
Yeah.
Socializing.
Right. Using very minimal amount of substances, right? Not getting intoxicated. If there's like a karaoke microphone, like picking it up and going for it, right? That would be opposite action to shame, actually, right? And it would be all the way though, right? Like making eye contact and talking to strangers. What would opposite action all the way to sadness look like? So we said opposite action is like you get up, you get out, you're with people. What would it look like to do that all the way though?
Do an activity with the people?
Yeah, so like actually plan, like I'm not just gonna go out to the park and just like walk around with you. I'm gonna organize like an ultimate Frisbee game for us, right? Or I'm gonna organize like some activity for us to do. Excellent. What else would opposite action all the way look like to sadness? I think sometimes it's found in our body posture, right? So like maybe like I'm feeling sad, and I could say like, fine, I'm going to the park, and then I just walk around like this and like, hey, yeah, and I just like sit down, like, yeah, I'm at the park, I'm here, just like chilling at the park with my daughter, right? Opposite action all the way is like walk like you're not depressed, right? Like stand up straight, like posture open, like maybe even smile. And this is what gets really, really, really tricky for people, is why is this skill belong to dialectical behavior therapy. Dialectical means that two things that appear to be opposite can both be true at the same time. I can, on the one hand, completely acknowledge that I feel really sad, hold that as very true, and I can smile. A lot of times when I say opposite action to my patients, to my students, they're like, that's just fake. And it's different from fake, because you're not lying to yourself. In your heart, you know, I feel really sad. And you're saying, with my body though, I'm going to act as if I wasn't, right? I feel really angry right now. I'm not going to pretend, I'm not going to lie to myself and say like, oh, you don't feel angry, it's cool. No, I feel really angry, and dialectically at the same time, I'm going to act as if I wasn't, because my ultimate goal is to feel less anger in this moment, and less anger over time, less intensely, less frequently, and for a shorter duration. So opposite action all the way to anger would be like, not just gently avoiding the situation, like not like maybe my urge in that moment is to be like, I got to send a message to Brooke to tell her, you know, like what a jerk she was. Like, I can't believe she did that. And I could like avoid, or opposite action all the way. I might actually like try to think about the situation from her perspective. Like, well, why might she have done or said that? Which is the last thing I want to do, right? I just want to think about like all the reasons why she's ridiculous and like totally inappropriate in what she did. Or opposite action all the way, I might even try to like compliment her, right? Which sounds like ludicrous. And it is, if we're not clear about why we're doing it. We're not doing it because I really actually want to compliment Brooke. We're doing it because I actually want to feel less anger, because that's effective towards my personal goals. And the same is true for shame, right? Opposite action all the way to shame. I think shame is an emotion that shows up a lot for me, and gets in the way a lot in my life. And so the first time that I heard about this skill, I was driving, it was my first week in grad school at Duke, and my mentor took me to this conference. So we were in Durham and we were driving to Charlotte, and he was going to pay for the hotel. He was paying for the conference fee. And I was nervous because I just met him, and he was like, he said like, all right, well, we're pulling up to the hotel. He was like, get ready, and then we can go out and get some dinner. And I was like, my urge was like, I felt shame, because I was like, you know what, like I did have a job before grad school. Like I wasn't like your traditional like 22-year-old PhD student. I was like a lot older. I'd had jobs, I had done stuff, and then I went back to grad school. He was only like 7 years older than me. So I was kind of like, let me just pay for my own meal if that's cool. And he's like, no way. He's like, my mentor, I was his first grad student. He's like, my mentor paid for all my meals when we're together. He's like, as long as we're together, I'm going to pay for yours. And I was like, He was like, what are you feeling? I was like, I don't know. Just like, I just don't want to. And he was like, are you feeling shame? And I was like, maybe. And he was like, well, have you heard of opposite action? So he described it to me, and I was like, oh, okay. So then I went to the restaurant, and I looked at the menu, and I ordered the absolute most expensive thing on the menu. I ordered like a $45 steak, and I got like this really expensive like frou-frou drink. And right, because opposite action to shame is going and letting him buy me my meal. Opposite action all the way. But I could have gone and been like, I'm not really that hungry actually. Like I'm just gonna get a salad, or like I'm gonna get a sandwich. Opposite action all the way is, you know what? I'm gonna buy like steak and lobster, and I can't even finish it all because I'm not that hungry. I'm just taking it in a doggy bag to go, right? And I'm gonna order like I didn't order an appetizer. I was not that bold, but that is, if we engage in those behaviors and we do it all the way and we do it again and again, we will feel less of that emotion. The problem is there's almost nothing more difficult to do than acting opposite to your emotion urge when you're feeling a really strong emotion, which is why it takes a lot of like understanding and validation, like to validate ourselves and say, it makes sense that I'm feeling this emotion. It makes sense that I'm having a really hard time like managing this emotion, and that I want to do this thing. And I keep reminding myself that's not actually effective towards my long-term goals. So I have lots of examples for like opposite action to shame. I'll go into those. But before I go on, any other questions or any other thoughts about what I just shared? Some of it, I imagine, is really intuitive. I imagine the all the way and again part might not be as intuitive.
And that all the way lead to feeling guilty. Or is that looping back around to shame?
Like, what could be an example of like how all the way could lead to guilty? Could you help me?
Your advisor, you just keep thinking about how you went all out and then you feel kind of guilty for doing it.
Right.
Not because you were hungry for it.
Yeah. So he told me, he said, Marcus, like, you're going to have to find a way to manage your shame, because there's no way I'm going to let you pay for your meals while as long as you're my grad student. Once you graduate, he's like, then it's fair game. Then we can buy each other meals or we can pay for our own. But he was like, you just have to radically accept that. And if you don't, that means we're not going to eat out a lot. And if we don't eat out a lot of the best mentorship is going to happen over meals and you're going to lose out. So he connected my goals and values and he said, your shame is getting in the way of that. So what are you going to do about it? Right. And I could like either grit my teeth through each of those meals or I could act opposite. And by the end of my time with him, I genuinely felt less shame. So I think the key is we have to be clear, is it my priority, not my parents, right? Like, we don't want to do it because my mom wants me to feel less sad or my dad wants me to feel less anxious. And it's because I think that this emotion is getting in the way for me. Then we would engage in opposite action, not because it's such a hard thing it's so hard to do that it really can't be imposed on us by someone else. It really needs to be something that we're like, you know what? This is a problem. The good news is it really, really works. I tell you from personal experience, using it in my own life. I tell you from helping many people in my private practice. And I tell you from just like the experience of being just what research shows, right? It works. And it's really, really hard, which is why I think we need to be really gentle with ourselves in the process of like, you know what? I'm doing the best I can. And this is as far as I can go. I'll do a little bit of opposite action and I hope I'll do it all the way next time. Or I did opposite action all the way once and I hope the next time I can do it all the way again and again. The tricky part about being able to do this is to be able to recognize that a lot of times we don't want to act opposite. So like, let's take like coronavirus. Maybe you feel scared that I'm going to get sick and that I live, with someone who is immunocompromised, or, we just don't know enough. Like, even though I'm like young and healthy, maybe like we do know that young and healthy people are also dying from coronavirus. So in that situation, do I want to use opposite action to my fear and be like, I don't even care. I'm going to like, I want to feel less fear. So I'm going to like shake random strangers' hands and I'm going to lick handrails and I'm going to like, I don't know, like when I see someone sneeze, I'm gonna like try to run into the path of their sneeze so that I feel, like that's like opposite action all the way to my fear. It's like, no, because that fear is actually justified. It's effective, right? And so what makes this skill really, really tricky, there's like so many things that make it tricky. So like the fact that it works, I hope is really self-evident. The fact that it's really hard to do, I hope is also self-evident, because it's hard to be dialectical while you're doing it, to be honest with yourself that I actually feel really scared, or I actually feel a lot of shame, or I actually feel really sad, or I feel really angry. It's also hard, I think, to be able to distinguish, is this a situation where I need to like act on my emotion or act opposite to it? Because the answer is not always, I'm going to use opposite action to feel it less. Sometimes the answer is, yeah, I think I need to lean into this emotion and feel it. And it's telling me something important. It's telling me to do that or to not do that. And I don't want to ignore that. Any other questions? I don't know, Jill, if I answered your question. Okay. I feel like sometimes, this is my shame coming up, I feel like sometimes people ask questions and then it just like, I have an idea and I'm like, that's a great question, but I want to say this other thing. And I worry that I just did that, but noticing that worry, thought I'm going to name it and move on. Anyone else?
I have a question, maybe jumping ahead a little bit, but how do we help our students who are, parents worry, we all worry, but we have adult children and they're away at school, they're far away. And how do we know when to back off or when to ask questions to help them? Are there cues that they would be giving us if we're pushing too hard?
So usually anger, yeah. Usually they'll express anger and frustration. And that might mean that you're pushing too hard, but it also might mean that you're bringing up for them emotions that they would rather not feel. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that what you were doing or saying was ineffective. It might just mean that they don't want to think and feel those things, but actually in your own wisdom, you know that it's probably healthy for them to think about like, and to feel that loss and to like allow themselves space to like be with that loss and to, you know, to continue engaging in behaviors that are in line with their values. So in terms of like how to find that line where it's like, I'm now my kid feels like I'm patronizing them. Or that, you know, I think one piece of advice is, and this is so key. I hope all of you write this down. Ready? This is sometimes my patients, I spend weeks trying to teach this principle to them, is sometimes we try to change our kids' behaviors by changing their mind. Don't do that, right? Like, don't try to change your kids' behavior by changing their mind. If you find yourself doing that, like, thank yourself for noticing that you just did it, and then bring yourself back to being, again, remember what I said before, be curious about what emotion am I feeling? Validate that, regulate that. What emotion is my kid feeling? Help them to, besides their frustration and their anger, help them to identify what that is and help them understand why it makes sense, why that's actually meaningful and useful information. So I would say, instead of like trying to change their mind, trying to get curious. And each time you notice the urge to like try to change their mind in order to change their behavior, try to get back to, let me be curious about what you're feeling and why that makes sense, because I'm sure it makes sense. Even though you're yelling at me and that's all I'm hearing, I'm sure there's something there that makes sense and I want to get it, because I felt like I had just asked a really basic question, but you're sort of shutting that conversation down, and I'm noticing myself feeling worried, but I'm also wondering if you feel like I don't understand you. You know, maybe you feel like you're not understood, like I'm actually just hoping to lecture to you and rather than try to understand you. And if that's the case, then I can imagine that like talking to me can sometimes feel really punishing. So like your reaction right now kind of makes sense. But I would say trying to be curious, because I think we're less likely to get into trouble if we're curious. It's not impossible. Of course, we can still have our kids get upset with us. And then the other part is, maybe we do need to manage our own anxiety and be curious about, like, is my own emotion what's leading this, or is this like something that is really like for and in the best interest of my kid? And those questions are tough to determine, which is why like it's helpful to talk to friends and family and others around us, like, to try to figure those questions out. Like, is this like about me and my difficulty handling uncertainty and not knowing, and difficulty like radically accepting that ultimately like my kids' decisions are mostly out of my control, that I can manage some contingencies, I can manage some consequences, right, to try to shape their behavior in directions I want, but ultimately like their decisions and their futures, you know, most of who they will be and what they will do is out of my control. And maybe like the challenge is my own difficulty accepting that like I can't make, you know, if they're depressed, like there's very little that I can do to make them not depressed. You know, if they're struggling with X or Y problem, like radically accepting your limitations as a parent and saying like, there's only so much I can do. And what do I do with the emotion that shows up then? Maybe it's guilt, maybe it's sadness, maybe it's worry. And then that's the work that we do, so that when we do bring to our kids, it's more likely to be about them and not about our own emotions. I don't know if that felt like, did that answer your question? Okay. All right. Well, I think we're
just about out of time, Marcus.
Yeah.
I want to thank you. We went over a little, but I think the conversation was just so engaging that I just want to thank you for being so generous with your time and knowledge. And I hope that the group benefited from this. I'm going to be sending out a survey after this just to get your comments, to your reactions. But thank you so much, Marcus, for joining us. And
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to all of you. Thank you for turning on your cameras. That feels really reinforcing for me.
Thanks.
And I hope
Thank
that
you.
some of this will be useful for your kids.
It was great.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.